Today, we're actually going to try and get through two sections here. Mostly we're going to focus on the security section though, because, well, it's a little more substantial and more germane. We're talking about, administrative security for the Uplogix deployment. And so there's a couple different pieces to that. First of all, we need to, when you're designing this sort of thing, you have to decide what your security policies are going to be. Are you going to have some groups that manage admin and other groups that are just users, which is kind of the model that you guys are going with. And then there's, how do we execute that? We've got an authentication piece. There's an authorization, and that's more like what you're allowed to access. And then there's auditing, of course, right? So we'll talk about all that here, and then we'll jump into the Worldwide Technology Lab afterwards to play around with that a little bit, so you guys can get a kind of a feel for it. So, pardon. So our model is, highly granular. We have a system that lets you create roles which allow or deny access to commands. So each role is going to be, a list of available commands. And then those roles get assigned to either users and resources or groups and resources. And when we're talking about resources, that might be the whole local manager, and that might just be one port on the local manager. That's what we mean by resources there. So we can really refine, how exactly what each user can access and what commands they're allowed to run on the resources that they're allowed to access. So we enforce the security even if network is down, because we, kind of cache passwords and fail over to local. You're still logging in with your same user even if there's an outage and TACACS is unavailable. And we still do all the same logging. Yeah, so authentication, that's step one, right? That's, user login. It's simple. We go back to TACACS, does this user exist, and is their credential that they presented correct, right? You guys are using TACACS, but we can go to most of your common authentication servers. When a user logs into an Uplogix resource, we check that user against their permissions. And so, if they're trying to log into a local manager that they don't have permissions to, their login gets denied, right? Even if their password is correct, they don't have authorization to access certain things, and so they won't be allowed in. With those roles, we can trim down what commands each user is able to use. So, a user might not have the config system IP command, right? Because they just need to terminal into devices, right? So if they try to run that command, even though it's a valid command, if they don't have permission to run it, we give them the same, command not found, as though they had typed something, nonsensical, right? And also, when you hit question mark, it won't show you the commands that you haven't been given access to. So that we dynamically trim that down based on what your actual privileges are. Yeah, again, if you don't have access to a resource, we don't display it to you either. So, in the case where a user has access to just one port on a local manager, all the other ports just won't appear, or they'll be kind of grayed out and inaccessible. So, the way that we achieve that control is through, it's kind of a three-part system, right? You've got a user or a group of users, right? And then you have a role, which is, again, a list of commands that they're allowed to run. By default, we just have admin and guest, but I think we've added a couple of, or we might add some more roles to your system if we decide we want to split things up, in terms of administrative policies. And then we have, a resource, which could either be, a whole local manager, an inventory group, or it could be just one port, in which case we're probably going to use labels, which I misspelled on the slide, it looks like. I need to fix that. But yeah, labels is a system where we can tag ports with a name, and then we can assign permissions based on that label tag name. So if you ever want to see what permissions a user has, you can just, show user there, and it's going to give you at the bottom there, you see it says all admin. So that just means that we've given this user dveracity, blanket permissions. He's got the admin role, which lets you run every command basically. Um, and he's got it on all resources on this particular local manager. Yeah, there's more to that. You can, of course, user accounts can be disabled if need be, and you can have expiration dates. So if you have somebody who's on a contract, you can put start and end times, after which they will not, they'll be disabled if it's not in that time block. Um, and then, of course, that's also where you subscribe to alerts and things like that under your user. Probably, mostly you're going to actually look at this stuff in the control center if you're using this stuff at all. Your own username will appear in the top right corner. You can always click through there and see. You can reset your password there. If you have proper permissions, you can add yourself to a group there, or configure your email address, or any RSA keys you might be using. Alert subscriptions and report subscriptions also live here under the individual user or group. Um, so again, we try not to give away the keys to the kingdom in any way. So if you try to log in and it's whether or not it's a password error or you don't have permission, we just say the same thing: permission denied. We're not gonna tell you that it was a password error versus a privilege error. So if you ever need to troubleshoot this sort of stuff, we can always look through the logs. That's the way to do it. Yeah, and that goes also if they can't reach the servers and login fails for that reason. So when we ship these, again, we have two default roles. We have the admin role and the guest role. Admin has the permission to do just about everything. Um, the guest role has just a couple commands, but you can always create new ones, right? You can do it on the command line with the config role command, and then you create an access list of commands that they're allowed or denied from running. So in this example here, we're creating a role that just denies login ability, and so that's going to lock any user that gets assigned that role out of whatever system you assign that to. So it's kind of a backwards way to lock people out of systems, but just for an example. If you have a user or a role that has denies and allows, any deny is going to knock out all the allows. So if you have two roles assigned and one denies your ability to run a certain command, even though another role allows that, any one deny in any of your assigned roles will prevent that command from being available. So. Um, so groups, of course, when you or have a lot of users, you don't want to organize, configure this stuff on the command line or onesie twosie. So we have a group system where users can be assigned to a group, and then those permissions, those roles, can be assigned to the whole group instead of just one user at a time. So this is just a table of how many clicks you have to do if you're doing it by onesie twosie. Um, now, once you've got your users set up, and I should mention at this point, if you're going to an authentication server like TACACS or Radius, your local users need to match what's in that system. But we have a system where, based on your group membership in TACACS, we can automatically create and assign you to a group dynamically. So that we kind of offload that to the TACACS system in that case, and that lets you do that all that management centrally from there. But there's some uh, options when you configure authentication for the local managers. You can do things like limit how many times a single user can be logged in at the same time to the same system, right? If you only want a username to be able to, or a user to be able to access the system with one session, that's one way to do it. It's probably not that important of a security policy, but then we can also, if we're doing local authentication, we can enforce password policies, which of course that all lives on your that policy all lives on your on you guys' authentication server, the TACAC server, which basically, to configure that, you just have to tell it where that server is and give it the proper passwords to log in. And of course, that's all set up on your system right now, so you guys probably won't really have to touch that part. So the command permissions that the roles give you, they map to links in the control center GUI, right? So the config system IP command, that matches to the link under the system or the network configs IP on the control center GUI. And so whatever permissions you have in terms of those commands, they apply both to the command line and to the graphical interface, to the web interface. So this is an example of how to create a user once you're logged in. So again, the user administration lives under the administration tab. If you click to administration, and let me expand this a little bit. On the left-hand side, you've got your menu, and just click users, and then click add. And I'm just going to create a user for myself, right? Set a password because we're doing local authentication in this case. And that's it. That's simple, right? Now, this user doesn't yet have permission to anything. If I were to try to log in, to the control center or to the local managers, I would get that login denied because, even though this user exists, this user doesn't have any permissions to anything yet. So, what else? Usernames cannot contain spaces, blah, blah, blah. So, so then let's go ahead and create a group too. All right. All right, back to the control center again. Go to that administration tab. Go to administration. Go to groups. There we go. And just add a group. And this is going to be Adam's group. Hopefully apostrophe is an allowed character. I think it is. Yeah, there we go. So you just go ahead and create a group for yourself as well. We'll use these groups to we'll put the users in the group and then assign them permission there. So go ahead and once you've got that group, it should take you to the edit group page. All right, and go ahead and open up the children users there, and go ahead and add your user that you just created. So I'm going to grab A. Thompson here, add him to the group. And then I'm going to hit save because otherwise those changes won't be saved. So that's editing group, right? Adding users to the group. We've just done that. Oh, I guess I should point out that the groups themselves, they also have the ability to have email addresses set. So if you had a distribution list that was for a whole group, this would be where you'd want to set that. And then of course groups themselves can also have alert and report subscriptions. But of course, they need to have an email address for you to be able to send them that stuff. So, once you've got that that user added to that group, let's go ahead and create and then modify a role. So, again, this lives under the administration tab. If I go to roles, I can click add here, and I'm just going to do Adam's role. No spaces. And then on this role editor page, you've got a list of permissions here, right? These are all the commands that you're able to run on the Uplogix, right? Config monitors, right? Config system IP, I think was one, and then there's the second permission that you needed was show dashboard because otherwise.
Dashboard and then terminal, so you can
terminal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so those are kind of the if you really wanted to limit a user to just accessing devices, that's how you'd want to do it. You'd give them the I passed it. Show. Where's the show dashboard? Am I crazy here?
I could look at the that role on ours. I'll let you know in a sec here.
Thanks. Yeah, but login is, required to log in. Terminal would give, a user the ability to terminal into devices. So let's give them that one too. And then, does it show system dashboard? Because we were just verifying this the other day.
Allow show status.
Allow show status. Okay.
Yeah.
Show status. And so these are alphabetical, of course. Point, I've got a role with just 3 permissions, right? They're allowed to log in, they're allowed to use the terminal command, and then this show status will let them see what is in the dashboard. So otherwise, see which ports they're given permission to. You can add more roles if you want, or not roles, but commands. Common stuff would be, config passwords so that they can reset their own password. Although I guess on a AAA system, with TACX, you probably don't want that. But once you've got at least those commands set for the role, just hit save there. And you can always, of course, edit that later. If we need to remove one of these commands, we can say, nope, no terminal for this user, right? And actually, I'm going to keep this user this way just to show you kind of how that ends up looking when we log in. So yeah, here we go. Create a role. Pretty straightforward. So then this is the part that is more complicated. It's not that complicated, but the privileges. There are 2 sets of privileges in the control center. So there are privileges to the control center GUI itself, and then there are privileges to the local managers in the inventory. So when we assign privileges, we need to do it in both places. So for the server privileges, that lives under administration, you go to server privileges right there. And I'm going to go ahead and give Adam's group Adam's role on the server. That will actually be a problem when we log in, but I'll show you what happens with that. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the inventory. I'm going to go just to the root group, which is usually where you want to assign privileges, unless you have state by state or region by region permissions. But I'll go to the root group, and it's under security. You go to privileges, and I'm going to do the same thing. All resources. Now this is again where you could restrict me just to the system level, or if we had any labels created, they would appear here, and that would restrict me to just to the labeled ports. But I'm going to go to all here, Adam's group, Adam's role. I'm just going to add there. So I want to show you what happens with that. But first, I'm going to grab one of these local managers IPs because when I log into the control center, because I don't have the show inventory permission, I'm not going to be able to see any of this stuff. So, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and, so I'm going to log out, and if I log in here, so you can see the inventory tab is gone because I don't have permission to view it, right? Every user gets a dashboard, so of course I can add a couple local managers to that dashboard because I do have permission to these local managers, but the inventory tab, you can see, is no longer available because I don't have that permission in my role. Same with all these other tabs. I don't have permission to any of the stuff in the administration tab, and so I just can't even click on it, right? But I can still, I do have permission to these local managers because we gave me permission, but you can see I'm not allowed to view almost any of the information in here, right? Serial number even, I mean, that's part of show version, and so I'm not allowed to see that. Same with the ports. I can click through to the ports because I have that show status command, but I can't edit, I can't look at backup files, I can't terminal because we didn't give me the terminal permission. And so, again, that's, the minimum permissions to log in don't necessarily, especially if you skip something like terminal, means that you just can barely do anything. Now I can, of course, SSH to it because I have permission to log in. And so, that'll work as normal. Let me just show you what that looks like when I actually get in here though. Right? So there's all my ports, right? I can see them all. But if I hit question mark, you can see I can try to change users, right? That's that enable command. But other than that, I don't really have permission to do anything. Show user star. Actually, I don't think it'll even let me do this. No. Yeah, I can view my own user. That's it. Right? And same if I go to a port, again, because I don't have any permissions really, I can log out. I can show the dashboard, which we're already looking at, you know, but that's it. I can't even terminal. It's saying terminal. What's that? I don't know that command. So that's how that works in practice when you get that all configured. So yeah, here's where the AAA server's configured in the control center. This can also be done for each local manager. But yeah, you basically set the authentication servers. We can have up to 4 servers. You just enter their IP or host name and the shared secret. Same for accounting. If you're doing stop-start accounting, almost nobody uses that. And then the password settings, again, those are for local authentication. That sort of password policy stuff is controlled by your by your AAA server. So we have a lot of auditing built in. We really like to collect information, and that includes about what your users are doing. So every user session is recorded start to finish, right? You can review those with show sessions or show session and then the number, because each session gets its own number. I can't show you that on this system because I don't have permission. I'm going to need to change users here. If I enable and become WWT user, there we go. Show sessions. There are all the sessions, right? And if I'm like, who's A. Thompson and what was he doing? Show session ID number is 36 there on the left-hand side. And there it is. User sessions aren't reviewable until the user has finished their session. And those also, they get archived up to the control center and live here where A. Thompson can't look at them on an hourly basis by default. We also, record all the alarms that we see, any problems we see on your equipment that we're monitoring for. We record that stuff. And events, user logins, user terminal sessions, config changes, those all generate events that get logged into our system. And then also, every serial port, we just keep a 1 megabyte rolling buffer on those ports. And so that's great if you need to figure out what happened on a system at a certain point, right? I can go to port 11 here, and if I use show buffer, there are 400 pages of, my local manager interacting with that port, and also, any user sessions that were in that time frame. I should point out you can search through this buffer with the slash to forward search, so or with the question mark to search backwards, right? So yeah, you can also go to the end or the start of the buffer with the greater than or the less than keys on your keyboard. And this is useful sometimes, not only for auditing what our system's been doing or other users, but maybe if a router or switch died, you might have some console log messages captured here that might give you a clue about what was going on with that system. So again, it's just us trying to gather as much information about what's happening with your equipment as possible. And then, yeah, upgrade history is also available there. So yeah, if you haven't already, go ahead and take a look. Log in and take a look at some sessions. Right? Oops, not available at the port level. That's a system level command, right? Looks like we've had a handful of people logging in here. That's great over the weeks here. Also at the alarms command, I should point out, if you do show alarms at the system level, it'll show you alarms for the Uplogix and all the devices. But that also lives at the port level, and that will just show you alarms for that particular port rather than everything across the system. Same with events. Show events. Right, this is going to be just events on the port level here, but if I go back to the system level and show events, that's going to be everything across the whole system, including, like I said, user login, my enable there, where I switched user. Right. These are interesting audit events, right? So this is just talking about how the account that the Uplogix uses to log into your managed devices might be going to AAA. Either way, it doesn't really matter. When you use your terminals in, we're going to log it out and make you log in yourself with your credentials, just to help maintain the audit trail, not only on our system, but also on your routers and switches and stuff like that. So yeah, this slide is just to say that when you hit terminal and you go into a console port, we make you log in yourself there. So that's security again. You can do authentication locally or externally. You guys are using an external server. You guys are assigning privileges and creating users dynamically based on their group membership, right? Which maps to groups in the Uplogix system that have the same name as your groups in your AAA server. We log all interaction, and I should mention also, not only on the command line, but we also have a audit report about activity in the control center. That's the principal report. And then yeah, for third-party AAA, you guys have that set up. We're offloading most of that to your TACX server, but we also have the ability to kind of fail over local in case there's an outage and we can't reach them.